Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Rashid in Houston, Texas, and this is Cross Currents. Today is Wednesday, October 15th, 2025. I'd like to start talking about the super aggressive and violent ICE raids that are taking place all over the U.S., hunting down illegal immigrants and forcibly throwing them to the ground, sometimes hitting them, pushing them really hard, handcuffing them, and just in general humiliating them in this attempt to act super tough and we're going to scare all the other illegal immigrants and they're all going to voluntarily deport, especially after they see Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem's TV ads that have been running for a long time now on all American TV stations saying, "Oh, if you self-deport through our app, we'll give you some money and we'll pay for your ticket home and you may be allowed to come back in the future." And then I feel like saying, "Oh yeah, right. You'll never be allowed back, if Republicans are in power." So this morning I was going through my Twitter feed as usual, or X as it's now called, and I saw this extremely upsetting video of ICE agents in Chicago. I think yesterday they were raiding Latino neighborhood and they came all out in their military gear and all their camouflage uniforms and with their masks on, of course, and lots of them had gas masks on because they were going around and trying to arrest people, and the local community was resisting, and they were all filming them with their cell phones, which is really great, and they were screaming at them and saying, get out, we don't want you here." And then these ICE agents, who lots of them don't have any military training, started throwing tear gas canisters at them, which was effective in pushing the protesters back. But it was just, so unnecessarily violent, and it was like they're putting on a show, to impress Donald Trump, and especially to impress Donald Trump's Nazi aide, Stephen Miller, who loves all of this, for violent repression of immigrants. And in another video that I saw today online, ICE were running after quote unquote suspects into a Walgreens. And this woman who was filming kept screaming, "He's a U.S. citizen, he's a U.S. citizen." And even though she was saying that, they had pushed the guy down to the ground and they were sitting on his back with their knees and handcuffing him. And it was just so unnecessary, all this hyper violence. And as you've all been aware and have seen, I'm sure over the past few months, there are so many videos of these ICE agents pulling out their guns and aiming them at people who are filming them. The latest one I saw was a woman was filming them while they were in their truck, and the guy opened the window and pointed a gun right into her face. And it's just like, what the hell? Police never do that unless you're posing a real threat to them, unless you're armed with a weapon, and since when are cell phones a deadly weapon? They're not. So it's just ridiculous. And the military are trained not to do that also. So most of these people that they're recruiting do not have military training, and they just think, oh, it's going to be so cool. We're going to be able to run around and act like tough macho guys and, aim our guns and our machine guns at everybody and blah, 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 blah. And we're going to be the heroes of the day. But, they're really cowards because they cover their faces. And this recent news that came out that the Mexican drug cartel, has put up rewards for killing ICE agents, especially high-level ones, up to $50,000 to kill a high-level ICE agent. Not that I condone putting out a hit list for anybody, but it just goes to show you how, they're all this anti-immigrant acts, especially against Latinos, has really, pissed off the Mexicans and the Mexican cartel. So I'm not surprised that they've come up with this list of rewards. Oh, and also especially worrying is when these ICE agents go to local courtrooms and wait for illegal, immigrants to go to their court dates, and then they wait right outside the courtroom and arrest them. The latest video I saw today was an African immigrant, and he had gone to the court as mandated on the correct date to his hearing. When he got there, he found out that the hearing had been rescheduled for a later date. As soon as he came out of the courtroom, they jumped on him, and he was screaming and, kicking his legs, and it was just terrible. So, I know that many of these Trump supporters who voted for Trump, this is what they want. So they're getting what they want. But, half of America doesn't want this. We're a nation of immigrants, except if you're Native American, then you're always here. But the overwhelming majority of us Americans are immigrants. My mother's forefathers, great-grandfather came from Norway and came to North Dakota and settled, and they all became American. And this is the strength of America and the beauty of America, is that we're a land of immigrants with all different types of cultures, food, religion, languages. But, after the first generation, people who are born here, they grew up to be, they sound totally American and they act American, and they do continue some of the traditions of their forefathers, but it just helps to build a stronger country for us, a stronger culture, stronger society. So this brutal crackdown against immigrants is really unnecessary and really goes against the founding principles of this country, I think, because so many of these people coming here are, trying to escape from famine, from, gangs wanting to kidnap them or kill them. So they're desperate, And I know many Trump supporters will say, oh, well, it's unfair if they come illegally across the border. How about all of those people who have applied legally through the legal channels and are waiting in their home countries to get their immigrant visas? And I say, yes, that is true. It is sort of unfair, but, we have to deal with the people who are here already. I just read a very interesting story in The Economist yesterday saying that after Trump clamped down on our southern border with Mexico, the number of illegal immigrants coming across has practically dropped to zero. And the number of immigrants trying to come up through the Darien Gap, which is between Colombia and Panama, and it's very treacherous, and there's no roads, and it's a jungle, and it's full of, scary animals and bad weather, that has also dropped to practically zero. So, Trump's, hard campaign against illegal immigrants seems to be paying off. So I don't think Americans should be freaking out so much about illegal immigrants getting into the country, because I just don't think they're getting into the country anymore. There's no data to prove that they are. So we really need a national dialogue about this, and not this brutal anti-immigrant policy put in place by the Trump administration. It's really sad to see, and it will make our country as a whole poorer if we have, less immigrants. They do all these undesirable jobs that American citizens don't want to do, like cleaning houses, like construction, like agriculture, planting and picking fruits and vegetables. These are all things that, more well-off American citizens don't want to do anymore. We really benefit from their cheaper labor in many ways, and they keep the American economy, running. And while they live here and do all these jobs, they're paying taxes. Even if they don't pay income tax, they pay taxes through the things they buy, through their rent, All of these have taxes built into them. So we should really rethink what we are doing and look at ourselves and, give thanks that we have had all these immigrants to build such a truly great, diverse, and strong country. We are the richest country in the world. We still have lots of homeless people. And yet Donald Trump insists on bailing out Argentina to the tune of $20 billion just because he likes his right-wing friend, the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, who is a nutcase and who has not been able to turn the Argentinian economy around. As usual, Argentina is a black hole sucking in money from the IMF, from the US, and from other countries. This has been going on for decades and decades. It's nothing new. And Trump just says silly things like, oh, they're such a wonderful country. So it's really, terrible. And then we have all our soybean farmers here in the US who have been stuck with all these soybeans that they used to export to China, and China is no longer buying American soybeans. Instead, they're buying soybeans from Brazil and from Argentina, ironically. And then here's Trump saying he's going to give $20 billion in aid to them. It is true that Trump said that he was thinking of setting up a special fund of $13 to $15 billion to bail out American soybean farmers. But really, if we weren't in this ridiculous trade war with all these countries, with all these ridiculous Trump tariffs that he's put into place, and this ongoing, battle with China, we wouldn't be in this place. American farmers would be exporting their soybeans as usual. We would be importing the usual things from China. We wouldn't be paying horrific tariffs on everything. And Trump wouldn't need to bail out American farmers. It just doesn't make sense. Nuts. So that's it. The Gaza agreement for a ceasefire, which was agreed to by Hamas and by Israel, is tenuously being held in place, but, at any moment it could snap. Israel yesterday killed 7 Palestinians in a suburb of Gaza City because they were walking back to where their homes used to be, and they encountered an Israeli military troop, and the troop felt threatened, and so they shot at them and killed them. And then Israel complained that Hamas hadn't returned the bodies of all the dead Israeli hostages, even though Hamas had said more than a week ago that it would be very difficult for them to find all of these bodies because of all of the rubble that has happened after Israel's relentless bombing campaign of Gaza, in which they destroyed at least 78% of all buildings in Gaza. Homes, hospitals, high-rise buildings, schools, everything's been turned to rubble. It looks worse than Dresden in World War II. And, how are you going to dig through all this rubble to find the bodies of these dead Israelis? It's very difficult. So yesterday, Israel suddenly announced, we're going to cut in half the number of aid trucks that we're letting into Gaza every day, which had been 600 aid trucks since the agreement went into effect on Monday. And then they said, on Wednesday, today, they're going to cut the number in half to only 300 as punishment to punish Hamas. Late yesterday, they backtracked because Hamas, I think, did hand over the remains of more Israeli hostages. And so I think we're back to 600 aid trucks a day. At the same time, Hamas executed 8 people from a certain clan, accusing them of being collaborators with Israel. And they did it in public in front of a large crowd. And this is quite disconcerting because, of course, one of the main points of this agreement is that Hamas be completely disarmed and taken out of power from Gaza. But they've been in power for so many years in Gaza. It's like, who else is going to take over? So Trump has been sending mixed signals about this too, because I think on his plane flying to Israel on Monday, he said that the U.S. had tacitly agreed to allow Hamas to remain armed and to enforce security measures in Gaza, just as a stopgap measure because there's nobody else to do it after the Israeli troops withdrew. Not totally, but withdrew from, I think, 3/4 of Gaza. And then yesterday, they asked Trump about it again at the White House. And he said, no. He said, we're going to disarm Hamas completely, and we'll do so violently if need be. So he's sending really mixed signals. I think Hamas should be taken out of power after what happened on October 7th, 2023, in which Hamas fighters invaded Israel and killed 1,200 Israelis. That was the stupidest thing the Palestinian movement has ever done. But we have to remember that the Palestinians are split into two. The majority of Palestinians live in the West Bank, around 5 million, and they're headed by the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, who's notoriously corrupt, and many people in the Palestinian Authority are also corrupt. But they collaborate with the Americans, they collaborate with Israel, and they keep things mostly peaceful. In Gaza, Hamas has been in power all these years, and they're very radical, and they're just like resist, resist, resist. And we have to keep sending missiles into Israel whenever we can. Under that 20-point agreement that was knocked out by the Gulf countries, the US, Egypt, and Israel, one of the measures was that Hamas would hand over their missiles to Egypt for safekeeping, and they would only keep their small weapons for self-defense, so nothing that could be used against Israel from a distance. I think that's a good thing to do. I don't know how it would be implemented. They said the Hamas leadership liked that idea. Not liked it, but they accepted that. But they said the difficulty would be convincing military leaders in the field about the need to disarm. So who knows what's going to happen. Under this 20-point agreement, an international force is supposed to be sent into Gaza to provide security. Some Arab countries had said they would contribute troops. I'm sure the Gulf states don't really want to contribute troops, but at least they can finance it. And I'm sure they're going to be asked to finance the major part of the reconstruction of Gaza, which, according to estimates that I read, will cost $70 billion to rebuild. And of course, rebuilding Gaza will take many years. It won't be done overnight. And in my view, why should Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Kuwait and Qatar finance the rebuilding of Gaza just to have it bombed to bits again by Israel 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If Hamas comes back into power or stays in power and starts attacking Israel again, this is a never-ending situation. So unfortunately, President Trump just wanted the glory of having gotten the agreement out. He really did twist Netanyahu's arm to get him to agree to it. The Israeli government, led by Netanyahu and his right-wing cabinet, are just raring to have any excuse to attack Gaza again. A good friend of mine said he didn't believe the cover story of The Economist this week that has like an outline of Israel in this cave, and you can see the light coming into the cave, and they're like, the light at the end of the tunnel. And he said that's bullshit. He said the Israelis want to kill every last Palestinian in Gaza, which I'm not surprised. And I also read a recent poll about that saying the majority of Israelis have just become, they've just become insensitive to the Palestinians. They don't care what happens to them. They don't want them to be a threat, but they, as Benjamin Netanyahu said, he's not going to help them form a new government or be, to be a successful and peaceful government to rule over Gaza, which is really a mistake, I think. What needs to happen really is elections soon in Israel to get Bibi Netanyahu, who is a war criminal that was ruled by the ICC, and he should be thrown out, and his super right-wing extremist cabinet should be thrown out with him. And we need much more centrist and leftist Israelis to come into power to deal with the situation. Because many people are saying, oh, the two-state solution is dead. It's never going to happen, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, it has to happen. That's the only way they're going to live, coexist peacefully. But the problem is that Netanyahu's government has been allowing all these illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank to expand and build, more houses and build more facilities. And they have these special highways that they build that are only for Israelis. Palestinians are not allowed to use them. And so they're breaking up the West Bank so that it's going to be very hard to have a contiguous Palestinian state in the West Bank. And then if a Palestinian state happens, how will the West Bank and Gaza Strip be connected? An American Brazilian friend of mine suggested they could build a tunnel, like the tunnel under the channel between England and France to make, transportation possible and safe between Gaza and the West Bank. But for any, peace deal to happen, Israel's going to have to dismantle a lot of these settlements and keep some of them there, and Palestinians are just going to have to accept it, unfortunately for them. But I mean, Donald Trump's whole performance in Jerusalem on Monday and then in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt was just sickening. I was watching his address to the Israeli Knesset in Jerusalem live on TV on Monday morning, and it just made me ill. He just talked and talked and talked and had all these personal comments about people in the audience. And then he said, oh, Bibi just kept calling me up and asking me for more and more weapons. And there are so many weapons that I didn't even know about. And ha ha ha. And he laughed and everybody in the room laughed. And I was just like, what the hell? America, you're guilty of having fueled this genocide in Gaza, of killing, at least 70,000 Palestinians, men, women, children, and injuring many, many more who have their legs blown off, their hands blown off. It's just horrible. And it is a genocide. Israeli supporters will try to convince you that it's not, but it is. They don't care about Palestinians. They don't care about Arabs. They think we're subhuman. And then he pointed out to Miriam Adelson, who supposedly donated $100 million to his election campaign last year. She's super, super rich. Her husband was a very successful businessman, and of course they're super Jewish and super Zionist, and they are dual citizens of Israel and the U.S. I think he's passed away. He had a media empire. Now, as Donald Trump said in his speech at the Knesset, he said, I think Miriam has $60 billion in the bank. And then he pointed at her and then to see what her reaction would be. And then he said, no, Miriam is saying she has even more money than that. And everybody laughed. And then when he thanked all the Arab and Muslim countries that helped get the ceasefire agreement, a reality, nobody in the Knesset clapped their hands, not even the Americans. So it was just really, really obvious that they're anti-Arab and anti-Muslim. It was really sickening. And then when he flew to Sharm el-Sheikh, all these leaders, world leaders, were on the stage. The Prime Minister of Italy, Melania, the Prime Minister of Pakistan was standing next to her. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, was there, and he looked totally out of place. He looked sort of scared. President Sisi of Egypt gave the introductory speech, and then Trump was called up to give his speech. And he just went through this list thanking world leaders. And he noted that Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, wasn't there. The UAE Crown Prince was also absent. And then he called out Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. And he said, oh, Emmanuel, it's so strange to see you sitting in the audience. You usually like to be in the spotlight. Ha, ha, ha. So he just makes all these inappropriate comments and people laugh because they're scared of Trump as the world's bully. And then at another point in his speech, he said, oh, and where's Melania? And then she said, oh, I'm right behind you. And then he turns on and he says, oh, can I say that you're such a beautiful woman? In the U.S., I couldn't say that because I would lose my job, but I hope you don't mind me saying that. And of course, she just grinned and looked like she couldn't stand him, but she had to she couldn't say anything because she's super right-wing too, and she's super anti-immigrant. So she and Trump agree on many, many, many things. Then the total prize for the Best Ass Kisser Award of that day in Sharm el-Sheikh was the Pakistani Prime Minister. He did an impromptu little thank you speech, and he was just so kiss-assy to Trump, saying, oh, he's such a wonderful leader and blah, 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 and the world loves him and blah, blah, blah. I think even Trump was slightly taken aback. It was so effusive and so brown-nosy. And Really, it was sickening to watch and listen to. Then after that whole part was finished, there was a hot mic on President Trump, and he was speaking to the president of Indonesia, and the president of Indonesia says, "Oh, I'd like to have a meeting with your son and with Jared Kushner." And then Trump says, "Oh, yes, yes, yes. No problem. I'll get it. I'll arrange it. You know, my son, he's really a good boy. He's really a good boy." So who knows what's going on there? Some people had speculated before this meeting that Indonesia was going to officially recognize Israel because they do not have diplomatic relations until today. And that would be an enormous win for Israel if it happens, since Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world by population. So let's wait and see what happens. But then, Trump just jumped on Air Force One and flew back to Washington. So he didn't stay overnight in Israel or in Egypt. He slept on the plane going there and coming back. And he just thinks, he's the bee's knees, as they say, that he should get tons of praise and should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. But, I'm not very optimistic that the ceasefire will hold in Gaza. The Israelis are itching for any little excuse to start bombing Gaza again. The problem now is where are all these displaced people going to live? They're going to have to live in tents until they have the time and the money and the resources to rebuild their homes. And that's going to take a long time. And we're going into winter now, and it's going to be cold. And, more people are going to die from the cold, especially babies and children. So it's really, really sad. More aid needs to go in urgently. Maybe they can bring in prefab houses and put them up really quickly to help house these people uh, in something, much more dignified and better than a tent. So let's hope for that, and we'll see what will happen. So if you liked my podcast, please subscribe. I'm on, this is video podcast is on YouTube. I also have the audio of my podcast on Apple Podcasts and also on Spotify. So look for me there if you just want the audio version. And I'll see you on my next one. Bye-bye.